He drained every penny from our savings, vanished with a woman who called herself a financial advisor. When my son walked out dragging a suitcase full of lies, I thought that was the end of what little family I had left. But upstairs, a 13-year-old boy was quietly downloading files, tracing transactions, collecting every name his father had hurt. While I sat with a broken heart, he was building something stronger than anger. He was building justice. Not for revenge, but because someone had to. I was folding Oliver's school uniforms when I heard the unmistakable thud of a suitcase hitting the floor upstairs. Not a bump, not a soft drop, a hard, desperate slam that made me freeze mid-fold. The old house creaked as I set down the neatly pressed white shirt and moved toward the stairs. I've lived in this house for over 30 years. I know every sound it makes. And that wasn't the sound of someone packing for a business trip. That was the sound of someone leaving. Nathan's door was open wide like he didn't care who saw. He was yanking clothes from drawers and tossing them into a black duffel bag on the bed. No folding, no thought, just grabbing. His work laptop was open screens glowing with tabs and emails and things I didn't recognize. He didn't look up when I entered the room. Going somewhere, I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Business trip. Last minute. He didn't pause. Didn't even pretend to make it sound convincing. Nathan worked in tech support for a small IT company in Eugene. They barely had enough budget to keep the lights on, much less send staff on overnight trips. For how long, I asked. Not sure. He swept his hand across the dresser, knocking over a framed photo of Linda holding baby Oliver days after he was born. The glass cracked as it hit the hardwood floor. Nathan stepped right over it like it meant nothing. That photo had sat in the same place since the day we lost her. He used to kiss his fingers and touch the frame before bed. Every single night. I stepped further into the room. Nathan. Stop. Talk to me. What's going on? He finally met my eyes. What I saw there knocked the breath out of me. Nothing. No guilt. No sadness. Just a cold, hollow calm. I'm leaving, Mom. His voice was flat, like he was reading off a script. I should have done this years ago. The words sliced through me. I had held this family together with string and prayer since Linda passed. I raised his son while he worked late nights and stared at screens and made excuses. I paid for groceries with my pension. I sat at every school conference. I kept the fridge full. And now he was leaving like none of that mattered. What about Oliver, I said. He's better off with you. Always has been. He zipped the suitcase shut. That sound rang out like finality. I imagined it echoing through the house down the hallway into Oliver's room where he was doing his homework unaware. You can't just abandon your son. I'm not abandoning him. I'm leaving him with the only real parent he's had. He grabbed the bag, walked toward the door. I reached out, grabbed his arm. Nathan, please. Whatever this is, we can work through it. Together, as a family. He pulled his arm free like my touch burned him. There is no family, Mom. There's just you and Oliver playing house while I paid the bills. Well, now you can figure that part out too. I stood frozen as he walked downstairs. My body didn't respond. My mind was trying to catch up. The words didn't make sense. There is no family. The house felt colder than it had all winter. I followed him on unsteady legs. In the living room, Oliver sat at the desk, algebra book open. He looked up as we entered, saw the bag in his father's hand, saw my face. Going somewhere, Dad? He asked. Nathan paused at the front door. For the briefest second, I thought I saw hesitation in his eyes. A flicker. Then it was gone. I need some time, buddy. Grandma will take care of you. For how long? I don't know yet. Oliver nodded once slowly like he was storing the information in a file. He didn't cry, didn't argue, just accepted it with the kind of silence that hurts more than any shouting ever could, as if he already knew this was coming. Nathan opened the door. The October air rushed in carrying the smell of wet leaves and cold wind. "I'll call when I'm settled." "Where are you going?" "Someplace I can breathe." The door closed behind him with a soft click. I watched him load the suitcase into the trunk of his car and drive away from the only home Oliver had ever known. The living room was quiet except for the hum of the old furnace and the ticking of the grandfather clock. "Is he coming back?" Oliver asked. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell him that this was just temporary, that his father would come to his senses. But I had seen Nathan's face. "I don't think so, sweetheart." Oliver closed his textbook, stacked it neatly with his papers. Then he looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before. "Don't worry, Grandma. I'll handle this." My mouth opened, then closed again. Handle what? He was 13. But the way he said it, the certainty in his tone, made me pause. He picked up his books and walked toward the stairs. "I need to check something first. Then we'll know what we're really dealing with." I stood in the quiet watching him disappear up the steps, and for the first time that day I felt something shift inside me. Not fear, not grief, something else entirely. I turned off the downstairs lights and made myself a cup of chamomile tea I never drank. It sat cooling on the nightstand as I stared at the ceiling, listening to the old house creak and sigh around me like it too was trying to settle its thoughts. Linda had always said the house was alive, like it could feel the energy of the people inside it. If that were true, it was feeling hollow tonight, like a part of it had been ripped out and left bleeding in the cold. I must have drifted off at some point, but I woke again around midnight. Not to a dream, to a sound. A soft, steady tapping. It took me a moment to place it. Keyboard strokes. I slipped out of bed and pulled on my robe, not bothering with the slippers. The floor was cold beneath my feet, grounding me. Light glowed from under Oliver's door. The typing didn't stop when I paused outside. It was rhythmic. Focused, nothing like the lazy clicking of a child playing games. This was something else. I knocked gently. "Come in, Grandma." His voice was calm. Awake. Too awake. I opened the door to find Oliver fully dressed, sitting at his desk, surrounded by notebooks, papers, and printed spreadsheets. His laptop screen was covered with what looked like multiple Windows columns of numbers and names I didn't recognize. "What are you doing up, sweetheart? Research?" He gestured to the chaos around him like it was self-explanatory. "I've been going through Dad's financial activity." I stepped closer, heart beginning to thud. "Oliver." He didn't look up. "I started by checking our bank accounts, the ones under your name and mine." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean checking?" He finally turned the screen toward me. "Grandma, your savings account has $18 in it." I stared at the numbers. "That can't be right. There should be—" I didn't finish the sentence. My voice trailed off as I tried to calculate in my head the rough amount I knew had been in there last month. At least 15,000. More, maybe? "It's right." His voice was still calm, but there was something under it now. A quiet rage. It started months ago. Small withdrawals at first, then larger ones. All transferred to Dad's personal account. I dropped into the chair beside him. My legs just gave out. "What about your college fund?" He didn't hesitate. Just pulled up another tab. "It's gone." I blinked. 52,000 gone. Moved into a new account 3 weeks ago, then out again. To where still tracing that. But I followed some of the emails Dad's been receiving. He's been working with someone named Vanessa Cole. She works at Apex Financial. He opened another tab, this one showing a polished headshot of a woman in a navy blazer. Her bio said Senior Financial Advisor. There were links to social profiles, vacation photos, smiling poses in front of tropical beaches and cocktails. She's more than a colleague. How do you know that Oliver didn't flinch? Because I have copies of their messages. He uses the same password for everything. Linda, 2011. I felt the room tilt. Your mom's name. The year you were born. He nodded. He never changed it. I took a breath, but it didn't reach my lungs. You. You logged into his email. Technically, I just used the login he left open in his browser. He's not careful. Oliver, Grandma, you need to know what we're dealing with. He opened a folder labeled Statements. Inside were scanned documents, transaction reports, loan applications. Dad didn't just take what we had. He used our identities to apply for credit. I found a personal loan in your name for $35,000. That's impossible. He clicked open another file. Your social security number, your signature. Forged, but close enough. I was trembling now. There's a credit card in my name. He nodded. $15,000 limit. He put your birthday down as 25 years younger. And he applied for another using my social. You're 13. Exactly. Which is why I noticed when something felt off. I rubbed my temples trying to keep up. Why did you start looking into this? He hesitated. Because he stopped being careful. He was always closing his laptop when I walked in, whispering on calls, deleting texts fast. I started reading, learning what cybersecurity. There are forums, tutorials. It's not that hard once you understand the language. You shouldn't have had to do this. But I did. He looked at me, really looked, because no one else was going to protect us. I stared at him. My grandson, 13 years old and already standing guard over our lives. What are you planning to do with all this? He turned the laptop toward me again. I'm going to stop them. Not with violence, not with shouting, with facts, with proof, with the truth. I'm going to make sure there are consequences. The room was silent again. The kind of silence that follows a declaration no one saw coming. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing against the windows like a warning. Or maybe a promise. Oliver clicked into another folder. It was labeled Evidence. He said nothing more, and he didn't have to. The screen lit up with rows of files, each one carefully labeled. Statements, transfers, emails, loan applications, password logs. It looked like something built by a legal team, not a 13-year-old boy. Oliver clicked into the first folder. These are the bank statements. I cross-referenced your savings withdrawals with the dates of deposits into Dad's personal account. I leaned in, scanning the columns of numbers. The transfers were staggered, spaced just enough apart to seem casual, but together, they formed a clear pattern. Thousands of dollars slowly drained. My name in bold at the top of each page like a signature on my own undoing. He moved to the next tab. These are the internal memos from Apex Financial. How did you get those? Vanessa's employee login was weak. I found her preferred password format from a couple of public records and social media clues. First pet's name and birthday. Once I cracked it, I had access to her client directory activity logs, even archived files. I stared at him, not in disbelief. I already knew he could do this. I just hadn't realized how far he'd gone. Oliver scrolled to a file marked Coal Employment History. She used to work for a firm in Cincinnati, Premier Investment Group, fired in 2020 for falsifying portfolio reports. Charges were dropped after a private settlement. He clicked into the termination record. It was scanned from an internal HR document. How did you find this? Court records. Public databases. The settlement itself is sealed, but the termination letter wasn't redacted properly in the filing. I let out a slow breath. So she's done this before. More than once. Oliver pulled up a chart he'd built in Excel. She's moved through 5 financial firms in 8 years. 3 of them flagged internal investigations for client account irregularities. All of them let her go quietly, and Nathan is helping her. He nodded. He created a shell account at a credit union under a fake business name, Green Tech Solutions. He listed it as a consulting firm. Vanessa helped funnel funds through multiple holding accounts. That's money laundering. Yes. And identity theft. Wire fraud. Misrepresentation of financial intent. You sound like a prosecutor. I've been reading a lot. He opened an email thread between Nathan and Vanessa. There were attachments. Spreadsheets, encrypted zip files. But what made my skin crawl were the messages themselves. Casual, intimate, and full of strategy. Let's wait until mid-November. Her pension check hits on the 3rd. Don't worry about the kid. He never asks questions. She still thinks I'm working nights. She won't look twice at the mail. My hand covered my mouth. I wasn't sure if I was trying not to cry or not to scream. He's been planning this for months. Since at least June. The first fake account was opened 2 weeks before your birthday. That's when he took me out to dinner. Exactly. He knew what he was doing. Yes. Oliver's tone never wavered. Steady, controlled. It was his calmness that unnerved me most. And the loan in my name. Gatang. $35,000, approved and funded. He forged your digital signature using a copy from your DMV paperwork. He had access to your file cabinet. I felt like I was drowning in numbers facts betrayal. How long have you been working on this? Since the end of September. I didn't have proof at first, just a feeling. But once I started looking, it all fell into place faster than I expected. You should have told me. You were already dealing with too much. I reached for his hand. It was warm, steady still. This is too much for you. It's not. Someone had to do it. He clicked into one last folder. This is the plan. I blinked. What plan to stop them? You mean report them eventually? But not yet. First, I'm going to freeze all activity tied to our social security numbers. I'm going to submit fraud alerts to the credit bureaus. Then I'll notify Apex's compliance department with the employment records and access logs. I'll redact my identity. It's the only way to stop her before she drains anyone else. And to force Dad into the light. If he thinks someone else is doing this, he'll panic. When people panic, they make mistakes. I sat there watching my grandson manage a crisis I hadn't even seen coming. They think they can disappear. They've been looking at properties in Phoenix and Boise. Vanessa's been in contact with a real estate broker under an alias. I traced her IP to 2 VPN tunnels. Both led back to their motel. Motel. They're not staying together every night. She's bouncing between his place and temporary housing under a travel reimbursement scheme. How do you even know all this? Because I looked, and I don't want to look away until this is over. Oliver leaned back. For the first time, I saw the weight of it all pressing against his young shoulders. But he didn't complain. He didn't look tired. He looked determined. Grandma, I'm not doing this just for us. She's using the same methods to steal from elderly clients. I've found 3 so far. 2 of them probably don't even know they're missing money. Then we have to go to the police. Not yet. If we go now, they'll scramble and hide the evidence. I need to finish tracking the transfers. Once we have it all, we make the report. This is dangerous. It's necessary. I watched him for a long moment. My throat was tight, but I nodded. Just promise me something. What, that you'll let me help? He smiled, a small, grateful curve of the mouth that reminded me of Linda. Okay. We sat there surrounded by papers and silence and the faint hum of the laptop fan. Outside, the wind had quieted, but inside I knew the storm was just beginning. By morning, I still hadn't slept. I must have closed my eyes for an hour at most, but the weight in my chest made it feel like I hadn't rested at all. The coffee tasted flat. My hands shook a little as I buttered toast for Oliver. He didn't say much, just thanked me and ate like he always did, calm and focused, like his brain never left the mission. At 9:20, the phone rang. It was the main office at McKinley Middle School. The secretary's voice was polite but brisk. Principal Adams would like to see me preferably before noon. I didn't ask why. I had a feeling I already knew. The drive to the school was quiet. Oliver offered to come with me, but I told him to stay home. He needed rest, though I doubted he would actually take it. Principal Adams greeted me in the front office with his usual tight smile. We walked down the hall to his office, passing a few students. I noticed one boy glance up at me and whisper something to the girl beside him. The principal motioned for me to sit. He closed the door behind us. Mrs. Green, thank you for coming on such short notice. Of course. Is Oliver all right? He's not in trouble, not exactly. But there are concerns we need to address. He folded his hands on his desk. His tone shifted. We've been monitoring unusual activity on the school's Wi-Fi network, high-volume data pulls, visits to restricted websites, attempts to access secure databases. I blinked. I wasn't sure what I had expected, but hearing it laid out like this made me feel strangely defensive. Are you saying my grandson hacked your school? I'm saying the digital fingerprint of the device used matches Oliver's school-issued laptop. He pulled out a printout and slid it across the desk to me. It meant nothing to me. Columns of code, IP addresses, timestamps. But I could tell by the look on his face that he had no idea what Oliver was doing or why. Oliver has a very advanced understanding of computers. He's always been ahead of his class. This isn't about giftedness. It's about boundaries, privacy, potential violations of school policy. I took a breath, held it, then exhaled slowly. What exactly are you accusing him of? We're not accusing. We're investigating, but we have to take it seriously. There are potential legal implications if any of this activity connects to external systems. I clenched my hands in my lap. So let me be clear. You think a 13-year-old boy is running some kind of criminal operation from your school Wi-Fi, and you brought in his grandmother before speaking to him directly. We wanted to give you the opportunity to speak with him first. No, you wanted to cover yourselves. You're afraid of what this might mean if it gets out. Principal Adams sat back, caught off guard. I stood up. Oliver is protecting our family. He's not hurting anyone. He's doing what adults should have done. We'll be in touch, he said. But I was already walking to the door. By the time I got home, my head ached. The house felt colder. Or maybe I was just exhausted. I set my purse down and found Oliver in the dining room laptop, open paper spread out again. They called, didn't they? They did. He didn't look surprised. Are you mad? No. Disappointed? No, just tired. He nodded. Then he reached across the table and handed me a stack of printed documents. I found more victims. I sat slowly. How many? 19. That I can verify. Retirees, mostly women, some widowed, some with limited family. He tapped the top page. This is Deborah Miller. She's 80, former librarian. Her account was drained in July. No record of authorization, no investigation was filed. She doesn't know, I doubt it. Vanessa sent her a fake quarterly report. Looks official, but I traced the source. It's a dummy account hosted through a masking service. I stared at the page. Her face was smiling in the photo framed in a local paper's community spotlight column. She looked kind, fragile. And you contacted them, I did. Not with names, just facts. Anonymous packets with copies of their statements, instructions on how to request a financial audit, and phone numbers for legal aid in Oregon. Oliver. They deserve to know I didn't argue, because he was right. And because I didn't have the energy to pretend he was just a kid anymore. He had moved past that. I reached for the folder again, scanned another name. Paul Warner, 74, a retired engineer. He had 2 daughters living in different states. His entire investment portfolio had been rerouted 3 months ago. And they never saw it coming. No one does until it's too late. I looked at Oliver. And what if they come after you? They won't. They don't know it's me. I scrubbed the metadata, bounced the IPs, used a burner account with no ties. Even if they trace it back, all they'll see is someone who cared enough to tell the truth. He stood up, stretched his arms, then walked to the window and looked out across the yard. Grandma, if we don't stop this, they'll do it again. To someone else. I watched him in the soft afternoon light. His back straight, his voice steady, his heart completely focused on justice. He didn't need me to tell him he was right. He already knew. And that realization both filled me with pride and hollowed out something I didn't know was still raw. Because somewhere deep down, I still wanted someone older to take charge, to handle this. But no one else would. Not the school, not the banks, not even the police, not yet. So it was us. A grandmother, and her grandson, trying to make things right in a world that hadn't protected them. I stood and walked to the kitchen. The kettle whistled. I poured 2 cups of tea and carried one back to him. He took it without looking away from the window. "I think they're planning to run," he said softly. "Then we need to move faster." He nodded. And together we sat down again, the evening creeping in, the wind quiet, but we knew better than to think the silence meant safety. Oliver didn't waste time. By the next morning, he was already at the kitchen table with his laptop open, a cup of black coffee beside him that I knew he didn't like but drank anyway to stay sharp. I sat across from him with a yellow notepad trying to make sense of the whirlwind he was about to unleash. First, he filed a fraud alert with all 3 major credit bureaus, TransUnion, Experian, Equifax. He walked me through each screen before submitting, making sure the information was tied to both of our names and social security numbers. Every keystroke sounded like a warning shot. Every confirmation screen felt like a small piece of armor being strapped on. Then he set up what he called an alert freeze. No one, not even Nathan, could open a new line of credit under our names now. Not without triggering flags, not without getting caught. I asked if this would damage our credit. He looked at me carefully and said, "Grandma, at this point, our credit's already been weaponized. Protecting what's left is more important than fixing what's broken." I didn't argue. After that, he drafted an anonymous report to Apex Financial's compliance division. He used a burner email address, attached the internal logs login timestamps, metadata from Vanessa's file pulls, redacted personal details where he could. He included a summary of the pattern clients, over 70, no close family, large accounts, regular withdrawals with no client requests. "I don't want to burn her yet," he said. "Not fully. I just want them to start watching her." I watched him type the final line of the email, the way he double-checked the grammar, the way he changed one word from manipulated to misappropriated. He wasn't just reporting a crime, he was setting a trap, and he wanted every piece to fall exactly where it should. "Are you scared?" I asked. He paused. "I'm focused. Scared comes later if we fail." I started organizing my own records. Years of bank statements, pension deposits, tax returns. I spread them out on the dining table, sorted by year by category. I used color-coded sticky notes. I was trying to feel useful, trying to feel like I was contributing something other than panic. When Oliver took a break, we made lunch together. Peanut butter and jelly for him, tuna salad for me. We ate in silence, the kind that didn't feel heavy anymore. More like strategy, like shared intent. "I've also been looking into their travel searches," he said around a mouthful of sandwich. "They're watching properties in Boise and Tempe. Vanessa's been pinging short-term rentals, probably planning to disappear once the accounts are empty." "You think they'll go that far?" "They already have. This is their soft exit. Drain everything. Start over somewhere no one's looking." "Can you track the money?" "Parts of it. The rest depends on what she does next. If she transfers to offshore accounts, I'll hit a wall." "What then?" "Then we hit harder. With the law, bam." His certainty was unsettling, not because I didn't believe in him, but because he sounded so much older than he was, like he'd already accepted a burden that should have never been his. Late that afternoon, I got a call from the bank. Not my usual branch manager, but a fraud officer. They had flagged 2 suspicious accounts tied to my name. I kept my answers short. Confirmed the accounts weren't mine. Answered their security questions. Then I sat down on the couch and cried for 5 solid minutes. Not because I was scared. Because finally someone outside these walls was starting to see it too. Oliver didn't say anything when he found me. He just sat beside me and rested his shoulder against mine. "They're paying attention," he said quietly. That night I made chicken pot pie. From scratch. Not because we needed it, but because the house needed warmth. Something normal. Something that smelled like before. We ate at the kitchen table, just the 2 of us. The lights low, the world outside wrapped in October dark. You did all of this in 3 days, I said. He shrugged. It needed doing. And what about school? Still doing it. Just not the way they expect. You're 13. Yeah. But age doesn't stop a system from bleeding you dry. I looked at him, really looked. The sharp lines of his jaw starting to take shape. The way his fingers curled around his fork with control, not nervous energy. The boy who once asked for help tying his shoes was gone. Replaced by someone I barely recognized and fully trusted. Thank you, Oliver. He didn't look up. We're not done yet. Later, after dishes and showers and one slow game of chess, I walked into his room with a folder of documents I had prepared. What's this? He asked. Everything I have? Bank accounts, retirement records, copies of checks. If we're going to fight, you need every tool, Mom. He took the folder carefully like it was something fragile. Then he looked at me and said, You're not alone in this. I know. We stood there for a moment quiet. Then I left him to his work and went to bed, not because I wasn't afraid, but because I finally believed we had a chance. And because the next part I suspected would come faster than either of us was ready for. 3 days later, I was at the sink rinsing dinner plates when the phone rang. The ringtone was short, a default chime, but it jolted me. I wiped my hands on a towel and glanced at the screen. Nathan. My chest tightened. I hesitated, then pressed the green button. Hello? His voice came through in a rush, ragged and frantic. Mom, thank God. I need to talk to you. Now. I stayed silent, waiting. Something's wrong. Everything's falling apart. I think someone's targeting me and Vanessa. Our accounts are frozen. The bank won't give us answers. Cops came to the motel yesterday asking questions about identity theft. Vanessa got fired from Apex. Now she's under investigation. Mom, someone knows everything. I looked toward the living room where Oliver sat at the desk, pretending not to listen. He wasn't typing. He was waiting, watching. Maybe your private things weren't as private as you thought. This isn't a joke. Someone accessed our emails, our bank records, even our phone calls. Vanessa's boss got a file with every transfer we made, every client she touched, every password reset, everything. She's freaking out. I'm freaking out. I rinsed a glass and set it in the drying rack. Craig used to do this too, I said softly. When he was a kid, he'd lie. Then panic when it spun out of control. Nathan's voice cracked. This is serious. Someone's trying to destroy us. You mean someone's holding you accountable? No. Mom, listen to me. They're going after us. You and Oliver might be next. You need to be careful. I almost laughed. The irony was too sharp not to cut. The man who left us with $18 and a pile of stolen debt was now warning me to be careful. Where are you staying? A motel outside of town. Near Route 12. Room 17. We're paying cash. The cards don't work anymore. Vanessa's trying to find a lawyer, but they won't touch her with the investigation open. Everything's unraveling. Good. He went quiet. What I said, good. Maybe now you'll feel a fraction of what you put us through. Mom, don't do this. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you and Oliver, but I didn't mean for it to get this bad. Vanessa had this opportunity. It sounded solid. She said the return would triple in 6 months. We were going to pay everything back. With interest. You used your son's identity to open a line of credit. I didn't think it would come to that. But it did. I didn't think we'd lose everything. But you did. He was breathing harder now, like each word took effort. You don't get it. Someone is hunting us. Vanessa tried to rent a new place in Arizona. The landlord backed out last minute after getting an anonymous tip. Our car got towed yesterday. Repossessed. We had to walk 3 miles in the rain. I didn't respond. He kept going. We were going to move to Phoenix. Start fresh. I was going to get another job. She has contacts. Or had them. That's what this was about. Reinvention. Erasure. No accountability. You should turn yourself in. Turn myself in for what borrowing from my own family. For making a bad investment. You forged signatures. stole identities, laundered money. You're not a victim, Nathan. You're a criminal. That word landed like a slap. I could feel it even through the silence on the line. I'm your son. You raised me. And I'm ashamed of it now. His voice shook. Vanessa's not who you think she is. She's just scared. We both are. She's a predator. And so are you. The room was still. I saw Oliver stand from his chair and walk to the kitchen, silent as a shadow. He picked up a notepad and scribbled something down, then held it up to me. Keep him talking. Police are 5 minutes out. My stomach flipped. Nathan. Yeah. You said the police came yesterday. Yes. Why did they say anything specific? They asked about Apex, about some of the clients. Vanessa said it was just a misunderstanding. They didn't arrest anyone. But now she's terrified. She thinks someone's feeding them information, someone with access. What makes her think that? Because it's all too specific. Not just general files, exact transactions, exact logins, even her emails from months ago. Interesting. Mom, what's going on? You're not as invisible as you thought, Nathan. What does that mean? I think you already know. You hired someone, didn't you? A PI. I didn't have to. Then who maybe you should look a little closer at what you chose to ignore? I heard the faint sound of tires on gravel outside. Oliver glanced through the blinds, then gave me a small nod. Mom, please, I need help. Money, just enough to get out of town. I'll pay it back. I swear, no Nathan. Mom, I'm serious. I don't have anywhere else to go. I know. That's what happens when you burn every bridge. You don't understand. They'll arrest me. You should pray that's all they do. His voice broke. Please, I heard footsteps outside. Voices. A knock on a door. Not mine. Then the click of handcuffs. A voice reading rights. A name. Nathan Green. I waited. Then the line went dead. I stood there for a long moment holding the silent phone in my hand. The last thing I had heard was Nathan's name being read out loud by someone in uniform and then nothing. No breath, no apology, just absence. Oliver stepped forward and gently took the phone from me. He didn't say anything right away. He just looked at me with a steady, unreadable expression, one I was beginning to understand was his version of control, his own armor. It's done, he said softly. I nodded. My hands felt cold, even though the house was warm. He opened his laptop and typed quickly. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside just enough to see the street. Our front lawn was quiet, undisturbed. The only movement was the sway of the birch tree in the corner and a cat crossing the sidewalk like nothing in the world had changed. Oliver turned the screen toward me. Local news site. Headline in bold. Eugene man arrested in multi-account fraud case, former Apex financial employee under investigation. He clicked into the article. A mugshot of Nathan Eyes, half-closed, unshaven, wearing a worn gray hoodie. The expression on his face was one I had never seen before. Defeated, confused, smaller. He looked like a stranger. They're adding charges, Oliver said. 19 counts of financial fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit elder exploitation. 19? I pressed my fingers to my lips, not to silence myself, just to stop my body from shaking. I don't know what I expected to feel. Maybe anger, maybe satisfaction. But what came was heavier than either of those. Grief. Because no matter what he'd done, Nathan had once been a boy who kissed his mother's cheek after school, a teenager who stayed up late playing guitar in the garage, a young man who had cried when Linda died and held his newborn son like he was the most fragile thing in the world. And now he was a headline. He had burned his life down and taken every part of our family's trust with him. There was a knock at the front door. Not the police. Just a delivery driver dropping off a package I had forgotten I ordered. I thanked him, closed the door, and leaned against it for a moment longer than I needed to. Oliver was still at the dining table reading silently. He'll probably try to call again, I said quietly. He might, Oliver said. But you don't have to answer. I sat across from him, pulling the package onto my lap without opening it. He said something on the phone. Before they cuffed him. What did he say? He told me not to give him up. That he was my son. Oliver's face stayed still. And what did you say I told him the truth? That the son I raised wouldn't have done this. That whoever he is now, I don't recognize him anymore. Oliver's eyes lowered, but I saw the pain flicker there. Even now, even after all this, he wanted to believe in the man who used to be his father. Do you think he'll go to jail? Yes. For how long, I don't know. Should we go see him? I looked at Oliver and saw the tightness in his jaw, the way his hands curled into his sleeves. Do you want to? He shook his head. Not now. Me neither. We sat there a while, neither of us moving as the sky outside turned gray, and the rain started again, soft against the windows. The house was quiet except for the slow tick of the clock above the mantel and the hum of the refrigerator. Eventually, Oliver stood and walked back to his laptop. He pulled up another page, this one full of names and dates and spreadsheet columns. It wasn't over for him. He wasn't done. Grandma, I want to make sure the others are okay. The people they hurt. I know. He clicked into one row. Deborah Miller. She's already filed a complaint. I helped her draft it. Sent her everything she needed anonymously. That's good. There was comfort in that. Small justice. Quiet recompense. Not loud enough for headlines, but just enough to tip the scales back into balance for someone who had been wronged. Nathan's face was still on the screen, frozen in that mugshot. I reached forward and closed the browser tab. I don't want to see him like that anymore. Oliver nodded. Me neither. Dinner that night was simple. Canned soup toast, sliced apples. We ate slowly without words. It wasn't sadness. It was the hollow that comes after a storm when everything's been torn up and you're finally allowed to exhale. After dishes, I walked down the hall and opened the closet in the back bedroom. Linda's boxes were still there, stacked neatly untouched since her funeral. I pulled out one labeled photos and placed it on the bed. I didn't cry. I just needed to remember her smile, the curve of her handwriting, the way she once braided Oliver's hair when he begged to look like one of the soccer girls. She would have been proud of him. She would have broken if she'd seen what Nathan became. Back in the living room, Oliver was folding his homework papers, sliding them into a binder with precision. He looked up as I entered. Everything okay? I nodded. I'm glad he's not out there anymore, he said. I am too. He picked up his backpack, then paused. But this doesn't mean it's over. Not for the other people he and Vanessa hurt. No, I said. It doesn't. And he went upstairs quietly, already thinking about what came next. The next morning, I found myself pulling down boxes from the attic, not because anything needed organizing, but because my hands needed to do something. The space was dusty, warm, and still smelled faintly of cedar and old fabric. I had avoided these boxes for years. They were Linda's. Stacked and labeled in her handwriting, each one a time capsule of a life paused too soon. One of the boxes near the back was smaller than the rest. It didn't have a label, just a faded strip of masking tape. I opened it expecting maybe baby pictures or cards. Instead, I found a manila envelope with my name written on the front in Linda's handwriting. Neat, soft loops. Carolyn. Inside was a letter. Not folded, not sealed, just resting there like it had been waiting. I sat on the floor beside the open box and began to read. Mom, if you're reading this, I guess I never got the courage to say it out loud. I love Nathan. I do. But I don't trust him anymore. Last week I found a bank account with my name on it. I didn't open it. The statements were sent to a P.O. box I didn't know existed. When I asked him, he said it was for tax purposes, that it was normal. But it's not. I've been watching him more closely. He deletes emails, takes calls in the garage, keeps changing passwords. I've thought about leaving. More than once. I even looked at apartments. But I stay. For Oliver. For the idea of a family. Because I want to believe he'll come back to us even though some part of me knows he won't. Please don't think I'm weak. I'm just tired of carrying this alone. Linda. The words blurred on the page as my vision filled with tears. I clutched the letter to my chest and let myself cry. Not the silent, composed tears I'd trained myself to shed. These were raw, messy, years late. She had known, long before I did. She had felt it in the quiet spaces, in the moments between dinners and laundry and bedtime stories. She had suspected what Nathan was capable of, and instead of telling me, she buried it inside herself, for the sake of a boy who would grow into a man she no longer recognized. I stayed on the attic floor until the light coming through the small window shifted enough to pull me out of it. I folded the letter carefully and carried it downstairs, where Oliver was sitting at the dining table with his laptop open, typing something with intense focus. He looked up when he saw my face. Grandma. I handed him the letter. He read it in silence. Then he reread it. When he finished, he placed it gently on the table and didn't say anything for a long time. She knew he finally said, and she tried. I nodded. She didn't want to believe it either. He didn't ask how I found it. He didn't ask why I brought it to him. He just reached for his keyboard again and opened a blank document. What are you doing? He didn't look up. Starting something. He clicked open a new browser tab and typed in a name. Then another, then began listing out bullet points, helping seniors spot fraudulent activity, reporting suspicious financial behavior, securing their accounts, recognizing patterns, avoiding phone scams. What is this? He turned the screen toward me. SafeNet Seniors. I think it should be a free online resource, maybe a hotline too. Volunteer run. Focused on elder protection. That's a lot. They need it. People like Deborah, like Mr. Warner, like Linda. I sat beside him and watched him build the first draft of the homepage. The mission statement, the layout, links to government resources, FAQs. You've already thought about this, haven't you? He nodded. I've been thinking about it since the first time I saw those fake quarterly reports. If we don't teach people how to defend themselves, this keeps happening. You shouldn't have to fix this, Oliver. I'm not fixing it. I'm building something from it. There was something in his tone I hadn't heard before. Not anger. Not even determination. Purpose. When Linda died, I thought Oliver would grow up shaped only by the hole she left behind. But now I saw pieces of her in him so clearly. The quiet strength. The instinct to protect. The willingness to carry pain without complaint. He was Linda's son, and somehow mine too. I leaned forward and placed my hand on his. She would be proud of you. He looked down at the letter. I hope so. Then he closed the page and opened another. A spreadsheet. The same one he had been updating daily. There are 2 more names. Just came in this morning. I want to verify the transfers before I reach out to them. I squeezed his hand once before standing up. I'll start a pot of coffee. We worked through the afternoon. Him at the computer, me sorting mail, pulling files, double-checking dates and names. Somewhere in the middle of it, I realized we weren't surviving anymore. We were moving forward, slowly, quietly, with purpose. And finally, not alone. It was a gray Thursday morning in late March when the envelope arrived. Plain government issued with the state seal faintly embossed on the top left corner. I had been sorting through grocery coupons at the kitchen table when I saw it sitting in the mail pile, half covered by a credit union newsletter I hadn't subscribed to. I didn't open it right away. My hands hovered. My breathing slowed. There are some envelopes you learn not to rush. When I finally slit the seal and pulled out the letter, the first thing I saw was the amount. $24,700. Restitution. Funds recovered through asset liquidation tied to Vanessa Cole's personal and professional holdings, jewelry, a leased SUV, 3 investment accounts in her sister's name, frozen, seized, redirected, a list of names followed, mine near the top. It wasn't everything, not even close to what we had lost, but it was more than I ever expected to come back. More than justice. It was acknowledgement. Oliver was upstairs finishing a virtual class session, so I placed the letter face up at his spot on the table and started lunch. Grilled cheese, tomato soup, familiar, quiet food. When he came down, he saw it before I said a word. He scanned the document, then smiled that small, contained smile he always gave when something went right. "That's a good start," he said. "Better than good," I replied. He folded the letter carefully as if it were something sacred and slipped it into his binder next to the growing collection of resolved cases. Over the next few weeks, similar letters arrived. Deborah Miller received a partial return on her pension. Paul Warner's investment fund was restored in full. Oliver tracked each one, marked the progress, sent anonymous congratulations where he could. He had become something more than a whistleblower. He was a quiet architect of healing. One evening in April, he was invited to speak at the Eugene Community Center. They were hosting a forum on financial abuse among seniors, and one of the organizers had stumbled across the SafeNet Seniors website. She had no idea the founder was 13. He wore his nicest shirt, the one Linda had bought for him before a school play he never got to attend. I watched from the back as he stood in front of a room filled with gray hair and reading glasses, and explained with careful, humble clarity how fraud works, how to spot it, how to stop it. He didn't mention his father once. He didn't have to. Afterward, several people came up to thank him. A few asked how old he was. He told them the truth. Most just stared, stunned. That night as we walked back to the car, he looked up at me and said, "I think I want to keep doing this. Not forever, but for now." I told him he didn't need my permission. He squeezed my hand anyway. The next week, the phone rang around 7:30 p.m., just as we were clearing the dinner dishes. I didn't recognize the number, but I recognized the label that came with it. Oregon State Correctional Facility. I stared at the screen. My hand tightened around the dish towel. Oliver stood nearby watching. "You don't have to answer," he said. I didn't move. "Wait," he added, pulling out his phone. He tapped quickly, then held the screen up to me. Nathan Green facing extended charges in state fraud investigation. Total financial impact, nearing $750,000. Estimated sentence up to 12 years if convicted. I set the dish towel on the counter. The phone continued to ring. 5 seconds. 10. My thumb hovered over the green button, then slid slowly to the side and pressed nothing. The call rang through and went to voicemail. Oliver didn't say a word. Some bridges once burned aren't meant to be rebuilt. I turned off the kitchen light and walked to the living room. The evening news played quietly on the TV, but I wasn't listening. I sat down, folded my hands in my lap, and stared at nothing for a long time. Forgiveness doesn't always need to be spoken aloud. Sometimes it looks like silence, like a phone left unanswered, like peace that doesn't come from forgetting, but from accepting that not all wounds need to be reopened, and some consequences are the only apology we'll ever receive. Oliver was already in the den, seated cross-legged on the floor with his laptop balanced across his knees. A soft blue light illuminated his face, and I could hear the familiar rhythm of his voice as he spoke through his headset. "Yes, ma'am," he said gently. "I understand. Can I ask if the withdrawals happened before or after your grandson moved in?" There was a pause. He nodded once, then began typing. No, you're not alone. Unfortunately, this is more common than most people realize." I moved slowly, folding laundry on the couch beside him. A warm basket sat beside me full of shirts, towels, socks that never seemed to have a match. It felt good to do something with my hands again. Something normal. Something quiet. Oliver was patient as he spoke, pausing often to explain. He pulled up a screen share document and walked the family through the steps of accessing transaction histories. He recommended they freeze the compromised account and contact a local legal aid office. He offered to send them a basic guide afterward anonymously just in case. "Thank you, sir, and please tell your mother she did the right thing reaching out even if it was hard." He signed off and closed the laptop. "They're in Ohio," he said, turning to me. The grandson had been taking her Social Security checks for 6 months. She didn't want to believe it until the bank called. I nodded. I didn't need to say much anymore. Oliver always knew what I was thinking. "Did you help them?" "I think so. Enough to get them started." He leaned back against the couch, rubbing his eyes. 13, going on 30. I reached for another towel and folded it neatly. The pile beside me had grown taller than usual. For once I didn't mind. The weight of the cotton felt grounding, the movement familiar. "You know," I said without looking up, "you've helped more people in the last 6 months than most adults do in a lifetime." He shrugged. "I didn't do it alone." I smiled at the corner of the room where Linda's old rocking chair sat. The wood was faded now, the cushion a little lopsided. But when Oliver was a baby, she would sit there every night rocking him to sleep with soft songs and humming low. I whispered quietly, almost to myself, "Linda, you can rest now." Oliver didn't say anything, but his hand reached out and found mine. He held it for a moment, then let go, and started gathering his notebooks. We didn't talk about Nathan anymore. Not often. Sometimes his name came up when a new letter arrived from the court or a new update posted to the legal database Oliver tracked. But mostly it was like watching a storm that had already passed. You knew it happened, but you didn't have to stand in the rain forever. I still hadn't answered any of his calls from the facility. There had been 4 so far. All in the evening, all ignored. Forgiveness for me had come in the form of boundaries. I didn't wish him harm. I just didn't have room for him anymore. As Oliver packed up for bed, I stood in the doorway and watched him adjust the corner of his desk, straighten his pens, align his charger cable. He was meticulous, focused, like his mother. "You've grown a lot," I said. He looked up and smiled. "So have you." The next morning I woke early. The light was soft, slanting through the blinds like a whisper. I poured coffee and sat by the window. There was no rush, no noise. Just the birds, the steady hum of the fridge, and the sound of Oliver upstairs already typing. Confrontation had come and gone, consequences had landed where they were due, and healing in its own quiet way had begun. My son shattered what I had built, but my grandson, he picked up the pieces, one by one, quietly, patiently, and built something better, not to erase the damage but to give it meaning. You don't always need to shout to be heard. You don't need revenge when truth speaks for itself. You just need to keep standing, keep showing up, keep choosing what's right even when no one's watching. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, if you've ever been left to pick up the pieces alone, I want you to know this. You are not alone, and you don't need to shout to be strong. We see you, we hear you, and we hope you'll stay a little longer and share your story with us too, because healing, justice, and quiet strength will always have a home here.